Hello and welcome to Frost Over the World. Later in the programme, the footballing genius turned actor, Eric Cantona, US former presidential candidate Denis Kucinich, the Falklands 30 years on, and is dieting still a weighty issue? But we begin with Europe. The wave of austerity measures throughout the continent has not been without its political casualties. Italy, Greece, Spain, Portugal and Ireland have all seen transitions of power as their new governments have been forced to make brutal cuts to public spending. Romania is the latest country to join the fray. Following mass protests in January, Mihai Ungureanu has taken on the mantle of Prime Minister. I spoke to him earlier from Bucharest. Well, I wasn't in Bucharest, he was. Prime Minister, it's a great joy to have you with us today. And let me start. You've been Prime Minister now just for a couple of months and so on. What have you found to be the biggest challenge facing you?
The biggest challenge is to keep this country on a steady way towards an economic rehabilitation, quote unquote. There have been two austerity years which have deeply affected some parts of the Romanian population, mostly budgetary, and I have now to take care of this steady course of my country. Now, my words are quite clear and they've been spelled out throughout my speech in the Parliament by the time when 6 weeks ago I took the oath. It's about prudence and responsibility. It is a country of great potential, and this is not hot air that I tell you. It is a country which has started its economic recovery with a good perspective. Apart from what's happening around Romania, and this is something else, this country has an excellent future, provided its course is steady, as I was saying.
And in fact, your predecessor resigned amid austerity protests and so on. Have there been less austerity protests since he resigned? Has there been an improvement in that in the first couple of months?
If you only refer to the protests, which are the sign that the democracy is functional, since I'm here also to fight for my citizens' right to protest against the measures taken by the government. If it is only about the protests, then I can tell you that there are here and there are people protesting. But this gives me the opportunity of acknowledging that there is a certain fatigue that is socially recognizable, a fatigue due to the austerity measures. But I think that it is manageable, and the medicine is very much the dialogue itself. The dialogue with different parts of the Romanian society. They have been deeply affected by the measures that were taken by the previous government.
With the protests, I mean, public sector wages were cut by up to 25%. In that sense, do you think the protests were justified, even though you obviously do not want them to continue, you want to move forward? But I mean, were those public sector protests, as it were, justified, do you think?
Well, I think all protests are justified, provided they are in the limits of democratic laws. As I said, I think that we should have expected protests against those cuts. On the other hand, I have a better situation in macroeconomic terms now, and we hope to manage to bring the budgetary wages back to what they were some couple of years ago. This is one of the bids of my government, and we're trying to go through. It's also a matter of priority, and one of the priorities of my government is to give, quote unquote, a bit of smile on the faces of my Romanian citizens. And this is not just the sign that it is normal to be compassionate when talking about austerity measures and their consequences in social terms, it's also a good omen for the economic policies leaning ahead for us. So, in a nutshell, I'm trying, and we will see this happening hopefully sometime by summer, I'm trying, taking into account the economic growth, to have the budgetary wages back in place.
Greece, Prime Minister, Greece is a near neighbour, and there's a lot of Greek money invested in Romania. Does that worry you in the context of the fragility of the Greek government?
I would not say that I'm in a position to worry about what's happening in Greece. Nevertheless, I cast a watchful eye over the Greek investment, for example, in the banking sector in Romania, which accounts for about 30% of the banking foreign banking investment. On the other hand, I think that Greece has now embarked herself upon a path of economic recovery. There are good signs of reform in Greece, and I think that the European Union as a whole would never fail to help our Greek friends to come through this hardship they face today.
And that's very interesting indeed. And what about Germany? Do you feel sometimes that Germany has too much power in Europe, or about right?
Germany is one of the most important partners for Romania within the European Union, is one of the main destinations for Romanian experts. I myself, I'm raised in German culture and I boast with this, so I'm very happy to see that Europe leans on the shoulders of Germany or on the shoulders of France, of the United Kingdom as well, and I could now start quoting all the 27 members of the European Union. So I'm not in any case making this kind of comment or, or conclusion.
Very, very good to have a chance to talk like this, and I hope we can do so again soon, and we hope to see you in London too, and welcome you to the studio as well.
Thank you very much. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you, and I look forward to meeting you personally.
This week marks 30 years since the outbreak of the Falklands conflict, concerning a collection of islands that are 300 miles from the Argentine coast, but claimed by Britain. 10 weeks and 900 deaths later, the Argentines surrendered, but the issue of ownership still divides the two countries, and parties on both sides are wondering how and when the dispute will be resolved, if at all. Here to discuss the future of Las Malvinas, as the Argentines call them, is Jimena Blanco, the editor of Latin News, and Falklands War, a veteran. He looks much younger than that, don't you, really? Veteran, though, Tony Banks. Let's start with you. Would you say that things have changed a lot in the way of the relationship between these two once warring parties? What's changed in the last 30 years, do you think? Well, you're older than you were then, because you were only 6 days old then, weren't you?
6 weeks, yes.
6 weeks old, right.
Well, I think what's changed most really is the domestic situation in Argentina. Great Britain and Argentina historically have had very good relations, with the exception of the one sticking point, which is the sovereignty over the islands. But I think, you know, in my own personal experience, I was brought up in a very welcoming environment to everything that was British. I attended British school, I learned English from a very young age. So I don't think the relationship between the two nations has changed much over the past 30 years. But the political domestic situation in Argentina has changed radically, from a very oppressive military dictatorship to a democratically elected government. This year we've celebrated, you know, yet another election. Sorry, in 2011. I still believe it's the same year. And so for Argentines, for ourselves, the situation in the country has changed dramatically, because we can express our own opinions freely, dissent with the government freely, express it in different ways, whether through social media or traditional media outlets, which is not something that people could have done in the early 1980s.
So the war, in that sense, Tony, had a positive effect in terms of internal politics in the Argentine, but also you saw friends of yours die in the Falklands War and so on. What would you like to see? Any changes now in the relationship? Would you like to see the war forgotten in a way?
I don't think you can ever forget the war. I mean, when people die, I think it would be unfair of us and disrespectful to forget those that were killed on both sides. I think what we need to do is we need to look at this issue and try and get some sort of settlement. Now, from my point of view, I would like to see Argentina give up its rights for sovereignty, because I believe if they do that, then the situation will improve. And it will improve for everybody. The Falkland Islands themselves are under constant pressure from the government of Argentina. I think the relationships between Britain and Argentina would improve. And I think if there is any mineral wealth down there, then the resources that are there and the wealth that that might create would be shared between the Falkland Islands and Argentina, because the natural place to service any oil fields from would be Argentina. So, but this issue of sovereignty and the right for self-determination is an important part of democracy. Here in Britain, you know, we have a democracy. We have devolved governments to Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland. The Scottish people are going to have the right to self-determination in a couple of years' time with a referendum. So one of the things, and we spoke about this earlier before we came on air, was that I think it's very important that the Argentinian people celebrate the democracy they have now. And I visited Argentina just 2 years ago and was very well received from ex-veterans, Argentinian veterans, because we were soldiers, and there was a mutual respect between soldiers. And I would really think that if Argentina could just take a step back, and it's very difficult for the Argentine people, because I understand from a very young age they're taught about the Malvinas, the maps of Argentina have Malvinas on them, but I think if they could try and get this in their own heads sorted out, the Falkland Islands very much want to remain part of Britain, then they could share the wealth that may or may not be there around the minerals, the fishing, everything. And I think that that would be a great improvement. And I think, having visited the Falkland Islands again a couple of years ago, the Falkland Islands do feel under a constant pressure, a constant threat from Argentina. And a lot of it's done diplomatically. And I think there's also that feeling that it's a significant anniversary, the 30th anniversary. So there's always going to be a bit of sabre rattling, isn't there? And also when internal problems in both countries, because of the current economic situation, it's a good way to deflect away from what's happening inside the country.
So 30 years on, Tony is very eloquent there of some of the changes and things that could happen. What should happen now, or should we just forget about the issue and know that in 20 years everyone else would have forgotten about it?
Well, I think Tony made a very good point at highlighting what areas can we cooperate in. One of them, for example, is this idea of getting in the International Committee of the Red Cross to help identify the bodies of, there's hundreds of soldiers who died in the war, who are lying in unmarked graves in Port Stanley. And that could be one way of us together celebrating the memory of the fallen, identifying these soldiers, and being able to tell their families where their remains are lying. But I think with regards to the sovereignty issue, the number one problem is that that's been written into our constitution, that the Malvinas are part of Argentine territory. So even if there were a political party or movement who agreed with your point of view, it would be illegal for them to give up that claim unless there is a constitutional reform where the Malvinas are stricken off the national territory, which I think it would be very politically costly for any government or politician. And it's not something that would be welcomed by the Argentine population in general. And it's true, we're taught from a very young age about our claim over the islands. I remember my mother complaining in school because a teacher taught us the capital was Port Stanley and not Ushuaia, which is the capital of Tierra del Fuego. So it is a very emotional issue, and I think the great thing to rescue from the saber rattling of the 30th anniversary is that it's brought the issue back to the fore, to people in my generation who were children at the time of the war, being able to discuss what happened, learning about the history, not just of the war, but of the islands in general, of Argentina's nation building in the late 19th century. How did we take control over a vast part of our territory in Patagonia? And I think for people across the world, this is a war that, you know, for many people, it's in their living memory, but that doesn't get discussed or studied in depth.
What do you think about the rhetoric of the president that Christina has been talking about? She wants to keep the issue alive, but at the same time her defence people and so on say that with all the getting rid of the various armaments and so on, that in fact Argentina couldn't mount an attack, which is a relief anyway, I mean, but couldn't mount an attack, so why keep the rhetoric hot?
Well, I think it plays well with the domestic electorate, the type of rhetoric. But I think it's absolutely correct to say Argentina doesn't have the military capabilities or the will on the part of the people to launch a war, regardless of whether it's over the Malvinas or any other territory. I think South America right now is very happy to claim to be one of the most peaceful regions in the world, to be a peace zone. And for the first time in the entire history of Latin America, we're seeing the countries of the region coming together. So I think the rhetoric and the policy have to be separated. One thing it's going to play for the domestic audience. And it's very different what's happening. If we look at when Christina is speaking to an international audience, like for example she did on Monday on the ceremony for the anniversary, her words were a lot more conciliatory than when she's speaking at a local rally that she expects will be viewed and attended mainly by her local electorate.
Yeah.
So I think there's, but how does she have a clear path going forward? I think the answer is we don't know. Her party doesn't necessarily know. The opposition doesn't necessarily know.
I think key points there is that, having visited Argentina, that there definitely is no will on the Argentinian people's part to go to war. That's definite. I think the rhetoric of politicians is always about getting votes. So Christina will say what she ever has to say to the electorate to get a vote. And the Falklands is a very emotive subject in Argentina, and this is why her rhetoric in a local political meeting would probably be quite different to one on an international stage.
Well, it seems as though the dialogue will continue in fits and spurts along the way, but we are a long way from the thought of there ever being military action over the Falklands, and thank God for that.
Yeah.
Thank you both very much indeed.
Thank you.
For those of us around the world who celebrate it, the end of Lent is fast approaching. For those of us of a less religious bent, Easter means chocolate bunnies and chocolate eggs. But that's when the guilt begins, with promises to get back into shape for the summer. Diets are not new either. As author Louise Foxcroft is keen to point out, we've been trying to purge ourselves of our body fat for over 2,000 years. Louise, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Where did it all begin? Where were the first diets cooked up?
The first diets that really begin with the Greeks and the Romans. The trouble is it's not quite the same as we think of it today as a sort of discrete weight loss regime. In those times, 2,000 years ago, to diet was to be part of a whole lifestyle move. So you would diet, keep fit and keep a good shape for personal reasons, health reasons and moral reasons, but also as a civic duty as well. So it's changed over those intervening centuries.
And today, is there more obsession with diets today than at any time in history?
Yes, I think so. I think that's the last 200 years, and that's since urbanisation, I'm talking about Europe and the Western world, and industrialisation and the rise of the media and the consolidation of the medical profession so that they specialise and you get, your diet doctors. But it's grown out of all proportion in the last 200 years, and I would argue also that it's become distorted. So it's not so much a health issue as an aesthetic issue, and that's a great shame.
A health issue, not anymore.
Well, it is as far as the obesity epidemic is concerned. Yes, but I think that the whole aesthetic side has rather overwhelmed the health side, and that's why it's part of the reason why we're struggling with the obesity epidemic at the moment. I think it's much difficult to get people to think about dieting as a health issue rather than an aesthetic issue.
What about the case of what would you say is the best diet you've ever come across? Or what's the guiding principle of whether a diet's a good idea or not?
I think diet is a good idea as a lifestyle choice. So it's not the novelty, quick fix, fad diet with a celebrity shiny cover that we're all used to seeing now. It's to do with a long-term, sensible eating plan. And I'd go back to the Greeks and Romans. I'd do a whole full circle and go straight back to moderate eating, plain-ish foods, regular eating, and bring in plenty of sleep and plenty of exercise, and you'll find that that's what the health authorities will tell you to do nowadays. The trouble is, it's not exciting, it's not sexy enough, it's not immediate enough, because we're very used to sort of quick gratification, not just with what we consume, but with what, you know, the way that we consume it.
Right. And what are the diets you don't recommend?
Well, at the risk of getting into deep trouble, anything that's a novelty, anything that is quick fix and faddish, I would still steer well clear of. So even those that are very popular today, that have some doctor at the helm who's producing the diet books, I would not recommend those, because they force you into an artificial eating habit. And what happens is that in the short term, you lose 5 to 10% of your body weight, but you will put it on in the long term. So your body will compensate for it. So
all right. How do you find a diet whereby you lose the 10 pounds or whatever it is, and it doesn't come back?
Well, you don't look for it on the bookshelves, and you don't look for it in the supermarket, and you don't look for it in the magazines. It's common sense, and everybody knows how to do it. It is that moderate, plain, well-cooked, fresh vegetables, fresh meat. It's just not overdoing our indulgence, and that's a long-term thing. That's been going on for centuries now. We know what it is, but we just don't have the patience or the capability to stick to it.
And what about people who say, well, decide that they'll go for a bit of slimming surgery to get rid of a few pounds in that rather
well, I don't recommend that
spectacular
either.
way?
That's been going on since the end of the 19th century and the introduction of anaesthetics. There have been apronectomies, and you could have an operation in the 1890s that would remove the fat from your underarm so you would look nice in your ball gown for the evening.
Yeah.
But even those doctors then that were performing that surgery were saying that their patients, mainly women, some men, but mainly women, had a mental twist. And the thing was that they would just put the weight all back on unless they went on a sensible diet.
I remember they always used to talk about the carrot and oyster diet. The carrot gave you the ability to see in the dark.
Oh, I see.
And the oysters gave you the ability. There we are. We'll take a break.